What's coming up is free. There's a whole world of even better stuff for our Patreon supporters. Go to patreon.com/wordinyourear to see how you can join them.
Welcome to another Word in Your Ear, this one about King Crimson, who we love, an extraordinary story and a band with an inscrutable leader, and finally someone with the required courage and patience has made a documentary to lift up the bonnet and see how the engine works. And that documentary is directed by Toby Amies. Toby, lovely to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. We used to share the makeup room sometimes in Hawley Crescent when I was working for MTV.
We were doing VH1.
Yeah, you were doing Video Hits 1, and I was always rather sort of intimidated and shy around you two. I felt what I felt like was a fourth former who was like allowed to hang out with the sixth formers as long as they didn't say anything.
Quite right too. Right too. Let that still prevail.
Yes.
But thank you for not beating me.
Or stealing your lunch money.
Yeah.
That's great. Now, Toby, I assumed when I watched this that you were an obsessive fan and it was a labour of love, but I'm not sure if that's the case. Actually, I mean, you're interested in King Crimson as a kind of intellectual concept, aren't you? But you were never particularly involved in them in their music.
No. To be very honest with you, I sort of, my connection with Robert is local. It's Worcestershire based. That's where I'm from. Represent. And so Robert and Toya moved into the same town, which Robert refers to as Breedenborough, as my folks lived. And basically, he and my dad were sort of the most interesting old chaps on the same street, and they got friendly. And so I met Robert sort of at my parents' house, I think. I did a bit of work with him for a Radio 4 documentary I was making about archiving. And then I went over for drinks on Christmas Eve, I think it was 2017, and was saying to Robert that another film I'd made, my first film, The Man Whose Mind Exploded, somebody had written to me on Instagram and said, "You don't know me, but I'm an enormous fan of your film, The Man Whose Mind Exploded. And actually, I thought I wanted to let you know that several of us here in Oakland have set up a sort of sex cult based on the notion of cosmic fuck, which is a tattoo that the protagonist of my first documentary had." And I was just like amazed by that. And I was having a discussion with Robert saying how great it is once you finish the work of art, you put it out there. And even though particularly this is the case, I think, with directing, if you're consciously thinking about people's reactions to what you've made, then something happens like that you could never have predicted. And it's a really wonderful part of the creative process. So then I woke up the next day. Actually, no, it would have been Christmas Eve. So it's Christmas Eve that we went for drinks. And there was an email from Robert, who's got the most magnificent email address, but obviously I can't tell you, but it's really perfect. And copied with the manager copied in saying, "Could you come over to the house? I wanted to talk to you about something." And so I went over, and David Singleton, the manager, was there, and Robert said, "We've got a 50th anniversary coming up. People keep on asking us if they could make a film about King Crimson." And Robert didn't want it to be like a BBC 4 documentary, as he referred to it. I think he said, one of those films where the dead have been brought forth but remain unburied. And so said to me, "Would you be interested in it?" And then he said, "Why don't we call it Cosmic Fuck, but spelt FUKC, Prog Rock Pond Scum set to bum you out?" And that was the working title of the film for the first 2 years of its life.
Astonishingly, never made it through to the end.
Yeah. Well, there's another
so
story
commercial.
there about that. Yes, yeah.
So just tell me a bit about the practicalities of this. I thoroughly enjoyed the film. I'm not the world's biggest King Crimson fan, which is, no bad thing to still enjoy the film. And one of the things that struck me was I wasn't aware of a film crew there at all. Would I be right in thinking that? Was it just you?
It's just you, wasn't it?
Was it the poor sound and the lack of focus?
No, it
that
wasn't.
Gave that away,
normally, you're just aware of people that the people that you're pointing the camera at are looking nervously at people out of shot or whatever, But you didn't have that. Is that right?
Yeah. So sound, camera. I was the lead producer on the film, and also I was the production manager on the film. And as I was typing that into the credits last year, I was like, production manager Toby Amies is a sentence that should never be written again, ever. But yes, it's, there are, and I think because I'm that sort of person, I've read pretty much every review I can find about the film online, including the sort of nebbishy ones, that you'll find in the deeper, darker recesses of King Crimson message boards and so on. And there have been some complaints about, a wandering focus on times and so on. But those are sacrifices I'm willing to make because, it is primarily just me with a small camera, with a very good microphone on it. But I think what I want to do is record relationships. I used to take portrait pictures for a living. That was my job. And even then, when I was doing that, I was thinking I can either take a picture of somebody having their picture taken, which is a very formal kind of transactional experience for everybody. And a lot of the time when you do that, you end up imposing your aesthetic on somebody, or you can build a relationship with somebody, because a lot of time I was photographing sort of normal people.
But talking about building relationships, so this was Robert's idea, but I'm fairly sure that he wasn't that cooperative for quite a long period of time.
No,
he went to start making the film and interviewing people, and he wouldn't be interviewed, would he? He wouldn't talk to you. So what happened there?
No, it was, it's just, this is the advantage of recording the relationships, though, is that even if they're going wrong, you're still getting material.
Yeah.
As long as you're rolling. So it was actually the first day of tour rehearsals. That was my first day of filming with Robert outside of his kitchen, and I was sitting there with the camera about this big, just in the corner, with Robert and Jeremy Stacey and Bill Rieflin, and. There was a break, and the manager came up to me and said, "Robert's getting a bit twitchy about the filming." And I was like, "I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting in the corner." It's just and then Robert would come up to me and sort of do these really very professional, efficient pieces to camera, telling me what's going on. Sometimes he would stand so close to the camera that it couldn't get a focus, which is one of the things in the film. But yeah, as we sort of moved out on tour and went through the friends and family things, I was sort of nudged further and further back. And as is the way in King Crimson, and part of the idea, the conceit of the film is that, not that I'm a member of King Crimson, but I want to take the audience into that space. And if I've got like a massive film crew with me, I can't do that, because you're just recording theatre at that point, pretty much, or everybody's sort of inspired to perform. So you do have to engage with people enough that you can be kind of irritating, and you are getting under their skin, but that so that the conversation that you have with them is not affected by the presence of the camera. Obviously, that was difficult to do with Robert, and at one point, it's not in the film, but I've got this magnificent conversation with Jacko saying that, Robert commissioned you to make this film. He wants you to make this film. Now that you're making this film, he decided he doesn't want to talk to you. And that sort of initially I was like, well, this is going to be good. It provides some antagonism and conflict in the film. But after a while, it was just like, well, I'm not really learning anything about King Crimson here. And there's another bit which is not in the film where Bill Rieflin says, of course, if you turn the spotlight off on yourself, you will be drawing attention to yourself on stage. And so there was this thing that was happening. That's
very good point.
Bill Bruford is, was sort of, he's not quite Yoda in the film, but he just has a a very clear understanding of the dynamics at play. And as he said, I love it when he sort of laughs and he says, "You see before you somebody who's not completely ruined by the process." But
it's so interesting that because a lot of the movie is about the groups, the internal dynamic of the group is in their relationship with Robert, who is a very, very hard taskmaster. This is a man who believes in cold showers in the morning, doesn't he? He believes in discipline. He talks at one point about how when they go on stage, they have to reach the band's potential. If they don't, that's a heartbreak on the level of his mother dying.
Yes.
So what kind of an environment is that to be in if you're a member of a band? What feeling did you get about that?
I think it's, I mean, this is like, I think if I'm making a good film, I think the film is good if you walk out of the film not knowing whether one thing is right or the other thing is right, and you're having to do that Kipling thing. I think it's Kipling, isn't it? Of like holding two opposing thoughts in your mind at the same time.
Yeah.
And the King Crimson experience for me is that you come into this space, you're probably going to do, if not the best work of your life, some of the best work of your life. But I think most people would say it's probably the best work of their lives. Simultaneously, the demands that are put on you in that space will be incredibly difficult. And so the sort of central dilemma of the film is like, was it fucking worth it? You know, is it worth going through this thing? But the thing
because the running gag is you're irreplaceable, just like the last bloke.
Yeah.
Which is really funny.
Yeah. One of the working titles I had for the film was Trigger's Broom, because it, like, you know, you keep on replacing the parts.
Yeah.
And it remains King Crimson, even though the component parts may be different.
Yeah.
But I think that it's not so much that Robert is telling people what to do. It's that Robert has created a space in which you are expected to do your best work. And so the hard taskmaster in that, or the most immediate taskmaster in that context, is yourself.
Yeah.
It's you that's pushing yourself. And we had 3 people editing this film, and the first 2, I think probably, I think we all experienced that dynamic of like pushing ourselves possibly too far in the search of excellence. So it's very rare that you find a situation where you can sort of say, Robert did this and therefore this thing happened. It's more that like Robert is allowing these things to happen. How much responsibility he has for what happens in the creative space he's created, that's for the audience to decide. But it's sort of
much of it, yeah. So much.
It's a head fuck, Mark.
It is so much just about the friction between the band members, past and present. At one point he says that I think it was between 1969 and 2013, life in that band, his own band, had been wretched.
Yeah,
it's the word he uses.
Wretched.
It's his band, so I don't know who's responsible for that. And he then says that since then, or this lineup certainly, is the first one that didn't resent him personally. So what's changed in him? That he's what's different about him now that people have that different reaction?
Well, I mean, fairly early on in this process, I said to myself, you are not going to remain sane if you spend a lot of time trying to work out what's going on in Robert Fripp's head. And that's the task I'm quite happy to put on to the audience in the film. Just give them enough information. But what's changed, I think you could say that, well, as Mel says in the film, that he's mellowed. Some of the original characters have mellowed. How he casts the band, as it were, the component parts, he might have chosen that so everybody gets on a bit better. And I think there's something also. And I, in a way, I wish there was more of this in the film, but there's something about that 3 drummer lineup that really changes the nature of the band. The
drummers at the front too.
Yeah. And it's,
drummers.
it's what is it, the only parallels I can think of there are Adam and the Ants. And the boredoms, perhaps, but there's something about that I think with the drums leading in a way, then maybe there are one of the reasons, even though I wasn't the biggest King Crimson fan, I fucking love music. It's my main, filmmaking's my work, but music is my passion. And through that, I'm sure you guys noticed that. I saw when I was in Louisiana recently, I saw this amazing Cajun band. They all look like tractor drivers. But one of them was wearing a T-shirt that said, "Relax, the bass player's here." And I think that there are certain types of egos associated with certain types of instruments.
Yeah.
Particularly vocals and guitar, let's be honest.
Yeah.
And I do wonder whether the sort of the foregrounding of this is pure conjecture on my behalf. Yeah. Has changed that sort of dynamic in the band.
You're kind of putting them in charge, aren't you? If you have 3 drummers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
they're kind of in charge. By sheer weight, they kind of they get their own way, don't they? And I'm not criticising at all. But
drummers are not going to put up with any nonsense, generally speaking.
I tell you what, one of the things that struck me when he's talking about the early days, when was it MacDonald and Giles left halfway through the great first tour. And I think Robert Fripp says he was so heartbroken. At one stage he said, "Well, I'll leave my slot as long as you keep it going." Yeah. And that struck me, that's a unique reflection from a leader of a band.
Well, isn't
that the gist of it? Though? You get the impression this is a group, very rare example actually, of a group whose collective music is kind of valued more highly than their individual careers, the people making it.
I would go slightly further. Do you know the other thing that I think it's like, it reminds me of most, it's not musical, is something like the Actors Studio, start, Elia Kazan or whatever. This is a place where we do things in this way.
Yeah.
It's all about loads of people coming in and doing it in this way.
Or Mr. Bennett's Centre for Continuous Education. It is. There's again in the earlier version of the film, there's a bit where I say to the guy from Seattle who spent a mere $5,000 coming to see King Crimson, I say to him, "Is King Crimson a cult with Robert Fripp as his leader?" And he goes, "I don't, maybe."
Yes.
So
on the subject of J.G. Bennett, I thought it was really interesting as a bit of filmmaking. There's a moment in the film where you ask him about J.G. Bennett, who was the guy who ran a spiritual commune that Robert went to for a while, and he takes 2 minutes to answer the question. I actually timed it. I went back and timed it. I thought my machine had broken because he seemed to have frozen. And for 2 minutes in your film, he sits there absolutely motionless and then answers the question. So what was going on there? That is wildly eccentric.
The mega pause, we call it. Yes. Yeah. I have had various theories about that. The most, the one that resonated most strongly for me was that there's a sort of mindfulness technique where you check in on various parts of your body as part of a meditative process. But I don't really know what was happening, but I think that in terms of, when I was sitting there in the office with Robert, and it was like, and experiencing it was like one of those cartoon moments where you've got a devil on the shoulder and an angel on the other shoulder, and the devil is the sort of TV type thing, and he's going, "This is amazing. Keep rolling. Don't say anything. Absolutely. This is incredible, and this is going to be amazing in the cinema." And the angel was going, "I think you need to check in on Robert.
Is he all right?
He's all right. He's just gone. He's gone. We lost him."
And the devil won out, and we have that moment. But it's sort of, I think it speaks to a wider theme in the film. And when we were talking about it not being like other music documentaries per se, is that one of the themes of the film, and this relates to the sort of the osmosis of some of Bennett's and Gurdjieff's ideas into the creative process of King Crimson is this notion of being present, and the sort of the film investigates different ways of experiencing and approaching time, because the clock of mortality is ticking very loudly, or the metronome of mortality is clicking very loudly throughout the film. So I think, in a sense, that what Robert might be doing there is a sort of form of mental time travel, and he's putting himself back into that moment. And it's clearly a very important moment. I think also in the film, it allows the audience, because you've got this barrage of, old man bile and this sort of, negative history, and everyone's bitching and moaning.
It's old blokes, isn't it?
Yeah,
curmudgeons, real old curmudgeons.
I've also had people going, it's just a bunch of old men moaning. And so it's like, well, they're human beings.
They're allowed
to teach
They're
us.
allowed to. They have as much right to talk about themselves as anybody else does.
Yeah. And
did you feel it was a happy place for them to be? I mean, it's really hard to tell, isn't it? Because, he seems to expect so much from them. He practices 4 hours a day, and the inference is that they should be doing the same.
Yeah, I think it is fair to say of Robert that one of his primary irritations is that he just doesn't understand why people don't get it. And I think that's one of the things that's really important about the character of Bill Rieflin in the film, is that he gets it. He absolutely understands what he's going to get out of it, why he's there, and why it's meaningful. And obviously for Bill, it's, that there's an extra weight to all of those things. But
we should probably explain, Bill was for a long time the drummer of REM, wasn't he? He joined King Crimson and then became very, very ill. I knew him a bit, actually, a fabulous bloke. And became very, very ill, and eventually, during the course of making the film, very sadly died. So there's a very elegiac quality to the things that you record with him. It's extraordinary.
And I think but also, and I always say this when I talk about Bill in the context of the film, there's something really fucked up about talking about your friend's death in narrative terms, but I'm going to, is that everybody in that band is facing mortality in one way or another, because they're all getting on like we're getting on.
Yeah.
And so, but because the clock was ticking even louder for Bill because of his diagnosis, it was just very powerful to have somebody talking about the importance of music in the context of your impending death. And there's a sequence in the film where you see Bill from behind in front of these audiences applauding, and he's telling us in voiceover. It's just horrendous details of what he's going through medically.
Terrible.
Yeah, it really is awful.
But you also see the fact that his work is bringing joy to all of these people.
Yeah.
And you just get it. You're like, there is meaning to music. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about, it's like, for me, it's a film about King Crimson, but it's also a love letter to the process of making music. And I just think there's plenty of old men bitching about the past in the film, but it's really important to show both musicians and non-musicians that it's actually really, really hard work. And for it to be good, it is really. And the thing I've got so much respect for everybody in that band is that they've all got their vices or whatever, but they've stayed in the game. And when they go out, even though, as Adrian Belew says, slightly bitchily, he's waiting for the
Adrian Belew says being in that group made his hair fall out. It's really good. Carry on.
I think other people might have some things to say. I'm not going to say all of that. But it's just nice to see people gentlemen of a certain age still taking creative risks.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
And you were saying, were they having fun? Then they're not really having fun. But
that's not why they're in it,
Exactly. I think they recognise they're doing something meaningful, and you can't.
But the audience really appreciate that. There's quite a lot about the audience, and I think that's really interesting because the audience have this extraordinary relationship with the group. Robert is very cold towards the audience, and they kind of accept that. But for them, it's a kind of religious ecstasy, isn't it?
Yeah.
But in fact, one of the people you interview is a nun, a prog rock nun.
Yes,
I remember she's Norwegian. I can't remember where she came from now, but what did she tell you to sum up what she said about the group?
Well, again, with that sort of devil and angel thing, there was, as soon as I heard about Sister Dana, the prog rock nun of Oslo, I the devil in me was like, that's going to be great in the film. Novelty.
Yeah.
And then I went to speak to her, and as you sometimes find with people who are really, really committed to their religion, it's a good way to understand the worth and the point of that religion. And so she just spoke really beautifully about the concept of prayer, and there's a distinct analogy between what she says about liturgy, which is that everybody's singing, but there's times you've got to shut the fuck up. Obviously, that's not her physiology. But you've got to be quiet and listen in order for somebody else's part to come out in the way it's meant to. And that's a direct analogy, both in terms of things Robert said to me about the importance of silence and so on, and we sort of fuse that with footage of the band that you can see. There's a brilliant shot of Robert's hand just waiting above the strings for the point at which he's going to play, but allowing everything else to go. So I think she sort of spoke with what you might say is the highest authority with regard to the parallels between how they pray in the convent and how King Crimson play on stage. And yeah, I think to go back to what David was saying, there is something quasi, if not actually religious, about the experience of I don't know if you guys saw them on any of the last tours.
I did, yes.
Yeah, so did you have that sense
Hackney
that
Empire,
I did?
I think it was.
Oh, okay. There's Chris Morris and Stuart Lee were at that show as well, I believe.
Oh, well, yes. I saw Stuart Lee there, yes. It's fantastic.
It's like having a deep tissue body massage or something. You're not entirely sure why it's doing that to you, but you very much feel that it's doing that to you, and you come out of it changed. But then there's the other interesting dynamic of, as Trey Gunn says, once people have had it once, they want it more. They want it more to an even higher level. Absolutely.
I suppose the other thing that it's a unique film in lots of ways, but one of the things that makes it unique is you're making a film about a group who've been doing well. Not quite. It's not a normal group. But King Crimson have been doing what King Crimson do for 50 years.
55 years.
There's nobody else in music of any kind.
I couldn't think of
that's been doing it for that long. I don't think so.
Yeah, and is there a group also, but was there anyone before them that's remotely like them or since? I couldn't really think of any parallels, actually. Could you?
I think the closest parallel I can think of to them live is Swans. Because Bill Rieflin played in Swans. So there's a monumental quality to what they do. It's almost physical when you experience it live. That is like that. But I think also the sort of the riddle or the enigma at the heart of King Crimson is that it's Robert's very clear that he doesn't like either term. But he loathes the idea of prog because it's like a box, when the whole idea is to progress. So I think King Crimson, I heard the other day that the true essence of the theory of evolution, it's not about the survival of the fittest, it's about the survival of the species most capable of adapting to changing circumstances. And that, I think, is that's the special thing in the DNA of King Crimson, is that it mutates. But at the same time, it remains recognizably King Crimson. Because it's sort of, as I like to point out, I think the Discipline Band is effectively a turbocharged post-punk band. They're not really a prog band at all.
No.
But they still somehow feel like King Crimson.
Yeah. So what does Robert think of the film? Because, I mean, he, as you say, the bits of it where he commissioned it and then he didn't appear to want to collaborate, and then he's now promoting it, isn't he? He's been going out and doing the odd Q&A and things, so he must approve of it.
If you're Robert Fripp, your whole persona is, I'm not the guy who says that's great. I'm just not. I'm the guy who works harder than everybody else, is further out there than everybody else. Yeah. That's my position in life.
I just say that it's very significant that very early on the film, someone says, now that I know what you want, I know what I can withhold in order to gain more power.
Oh, right.
Yes. So I do you know the musician Hal Gelb?
Yeah.
Yes, Giant Sand and all that.
Yeah. Hal's a friend of mine, and I approached him a long time ago saying, I'd love to make a film about you. And he just said to me, why would I want a film made about me? And I remember thinking, I've got no good answer to that question.
No, absolutely. Perfectly good point.
I wouldn't want to have a film made about me, and I particularly wouldn't want to have a film made about me by somebody who's sort of, whole modus operandi was to get under people's skin and sort of develop relationships with them and achieve this on-screen intimacy that allows people to see things that don't normally get seen. That's the last thing I would want. Yeah. So he has said various things about the film, some of which have been not negative. He said on several occasions that he wanted me to tell him what King Crimson is, and that the film doesn't really do that. But my counter to that is that I think what the film demonstrates that King Crimson is that it's something to live for. But it's also, as I said, it's in a constant state of flux. It remains itself whilst consistently changing, and that's as close to a definition as I could possibly get. But it's not, because of this nature of flux. It's not fluxus. It's not something you can necessarily define. He's also said that it's something about musicians living and dying that was relatively positive. And then recently he said that I think that he, and again, I'm terrified of paraphrasing him because I won't get into direct trouble. But, this is the thing, is you just don't know where the boundaries are until you've crossed them.
He likes ticking people off. He loves it.
He does.
It's the kind of school teacher. He's a school teacher.
I don't know if I told you that, like, when people said, what's it like being on tour with King Crimson? I said, well, having gone to a minor public school, I think it's a lot like going on tour with the rugby team. And at the last minute, the games master falls ill, and they send the rugby team out with a head of maths.
There you go. That's very good. Absolutely what it is.
And the team start winning. So nobody
wants to mess with it. Nobody wants to mess with it. I'll tell you what, just finally, one thing, my favorite, I've seen so many rock and roll films in my life. I've seen every cliche a million times over. But your film contained a shot I've never seen before, which is you're interviewing one member of the band in the foreground, and Robert is in the background tootling about with something. And then when you're halfway through the question, suddenly Robert goes, "Oh, that's a load of bollocks."
That's a ridiculous question.
Yeah.
And he turns to it's Jacko, he's interviewing Jacko Jackson, and he says, "Don't answer that. It's a ridiculous question." And you say to him, "Well, what's a better question then?" Which is very good, actually.
And that's what
that's pure grit.
I really admired that, because I thought they're both mic'd up. Oh, you can hear them both.
Actually, just a really interesting sort of aside. When I was kitting up for the film and I was shooting the rehearsals and I hadn't bought my mic, I said to one of the sound guys, I said, "Look, there's these two Sennheiser ones, the mics. There's one that's about 500 quid, and there's this other one that's like pushing $2,000. Which one should I get?" And he just went, "I don't understand why you're asking me this question. Get the good one." Right. So that's why you can hear Robert. It's had a really great mic.
Because normally, normally I always think when anything spontaneous happens in front of a film crew, it misses it.
Yeah,
because it's not pointing the camera in the right direction, or it's not mic'd up properly. Whereas this captures that.
It is.
It's really good.
It's a great film.
Thank you.
It's terrific.
Oh, bless you both.
And we'll put a little thing at the end telling people where there are various screenings, I think cinema screenings all around the country, and we'll let people know where those are. And it's congratulations. It's fantastic.
Bless you. Coming really from the sixth form, I really appreciate that.
Not at all.
You can come to Film Society.
Yes. Join Film Soc.
If I get one of those RAF greatcoats, will you let me into the
Yes,
gang?
we will. Yeah, absolutely.